Now the kings. In chapter 17 of Deuteronomy, we get the law of the kings. Was there a king in Israel in Moses' time? No. Actually, you guys have just read the book of Judges. Question, was there a king in Israel during the period of Judges? And every man did that which is right in his own eyes, and there was what? No king in Israel. Okay? So there's no king in Israel. Moses tells them that they will have a king. Moses tells them that they will have a king. In Deuteronomy 17, he sets it up for the king. And here's what he says. When you enter the land your Lord your God is giving you, and have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, let us have a king over us like the nations around us. By the way, is that exactly what they would say? You guys are going to be reading the book of Samuel this week. This is exactly what they would say. We want a king like the other nations around us. Moses said, okay, it's okay for you guys to have a king. You're going to have a king. Be sure to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. So God's going to be involved in the selection of the king, and he must be from your own brothers. Question, does the king have to be Jewish? He's got to be one of your own brothers. He's got to be born Jew kind of thing. Do not place a foreigner over you, one who is not a brother Israelite. The king must, moreover, not do three things. So there's three things that a king should not do. Okay, three things a king should not do. First of all, Moses says, he should not acquire a great number of horses. He shouldn't multiply horses. Now, what's the deal with multiplying horses? Horses back in those days are what? Instruments of war. And he basically said, don't multiply, because if they did that, their trust would be in what? Would their trust be in God, or would their trust be in their horses for war? And so he says, no, don't multiply horses. I want you to trust me, not in the strength of your horses, and then go back to Egypt, because Egypt was one of the places where they got their horses from. He says, I don't want you going back to Egypt and things. I want you, don't multiply horses, okay? Number two, he says, don't multiply wives. Don't multiply wives. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. Can you tell me a king of Israel who had many wives and his heart was led astray? Solomon or Shlomo, okay? Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines? And some people say he was supposed to be a smart man? Anyways, sorry, we'll get into Solomon later on. I've spent half my life studying Solomon, and that narrative of Solomon is really interesting. There's a great deal of irony and upside-downness in Solomon. Okay, the wisest man turns out to be the what? Yeah, and so you get this connection that wisdom and folly are on the backside, can actually be connected in certain ways. And so, okay, but anyways, don't multiply wives, okay, because they'll lead your heart astray. That's exactly what happened with Solomon, with his 700 wives and his 300 concubines. And then the third thing that you're not supposed to multiply, and this is critical, I think, for our age, is basically do not multiply silver and gold. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. The king is not to use his position of authority to acquire and accumulate gold and silver for himself. Okay? Do people use their position to accumulate stuff for themselves? And Moses says, no, the king should not be acquiring stuff. Because, by the way, where does the king get all his silver and gold? Does he get it from the people? And so this Moses says, no, the king should not acquire a large amount of silver and gold for himself. Now, by the way, did Solomon have a lot of gold and silver? Was that a gift from God? And so you got Solomon, this interesting kind of mix there, and we'll have to look at that later. So no multiplying horses, no multiplying wives, no multiplying silver and gold. The king is not to do those things. Now, what is the king to do? That's what he's not to do, multiply those three things. What is the king to do? And basically, there's one commandment for the king. It says this in verse 18, chapter 17, verse 18. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law. He is to write on a scroll a copy of this law. Okay? So the king himself is to make a handwritten copy of the law. Why is he to do that? Taken from the priests and Levites. It is to be with him. He is to read it all the days of his life so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and to follow carefully all the words of this law and these decrees. He's to write the law so that he'll know the law so that he can rule according to the law. And so the king is to personally write a copy of the law so that he'll know the law to rule according to the law of Moses, okay? So this is a king. Was Israel to have a king? Yes. Did God, through Moses, tell them they would have a king, like the other nations? Yes. Before the king, who was their king? Before the king himself, God was their king. But God tells them that they're going to have a human king. God tells them they're going to have a human king. He's not to multiply those three things. He's to make a copy of the law. Who would ultimately be the human king over Israel? Like forever. Jesus will be the king of Israel kind of thing. But Jesus will stand as whose son? As the king of Israel. David's son. Is David going to be the king of Israel? David will be the king of Israel, and Jesus will stand as David's greater son, so to speak. Okay, Jesus is a son of David, the king of Israel. And so you get that kind of stuff going on with Jesus. Okay, priests and Levites, another institution that Moses kind of sets up here. Priests and Levites. What's the problem with priests and Levites? Chapter 18, verse 2. Okay, it says, they shall have no inheritance among their brothers. The priests and Levites got no land. They did not receive land from the Lord. All the other tribes get land. The Levites are not to have any land. Why? What was their inheritance? The land was not their inheritance. The text here says, you get no inheritance among their brothers. The Lord is their inheritance. So the Levites and priests, what was their inheritance? They didn't get the land. They got Levitical cities. But they didn't get the land. The Lord was their inheritance. And so, so priests and Levites. Are the priests and Levites going to be scattered all over Israel then? Scattered all over Israel in these Levitical cities. I believe there's 48 Levitical cities scattered through. So there'll be priests and Levites scattered all over. And one of the jobs of the priests and Levites then will be to teach the law. One of the jobs of the priests and Levites will be to teach the law. They're scattered all through Israel and that kind of thing. So these are the major institutions that Moses is on Mount Nebo. He can't go over into the Promised Land, so he sets up these institutions ahead of time. Do you see that the book of Deuteronomy is like a constitution? Setting up the institutions that will run the government for the next hundreds and hundreds of years. Moses sets that up, and these are the institutions he sets up. And